Attached to the Morgan Library is one of the oldest brownstones in Manhattan, but what did it used to look like? What kind of lavish interiors were hiding behind its walls? Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are traveling back in time to uncover the lost interiors of the Phelps-Morgan mansion. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. In 1867, Isaac Newton Phelps Stokes was born into a world of wealth and influence. His father, Anson Phelps Stokes, was one of the wealthiest men in America with a fortune built from hardware, banking, and real estate. His birthplace was at one of the most coveted addresses on the planet, 231 Madison Avenue in Manhattan. His mother Helen had inherited the house from her father, who had built the brownstone in 1854. Growing up amidst New York's elite, Isaac had a privileged upbringing, but he wasn't content to simply bask in luxury. He wanted to leave his own mark. Stokes' journey began at prestigious institutions where he absorbed the finest education money could buy. After attending St. Paul's School in Concord and the Berkeley School in New York, he graduated from Harvard in 1891, but his thirst for knowledge wasn't easily quenched, and he pursued further studies at Columbia School of Mines and the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, where he refined his architectural skills. In 1895, Stokes married Edith Minturn, a woman of charm and intellect, and together they settled in Paris, where his architectural journey took flight. By 1897, Stokes co-founded the architectural firm Howells & Stokes, embarking on a career that would blend design with social reform. While his early projects reflected the grandeur of his upbringing, like designing private homes for New York's elite, Stokes found his calling in public service. His work wasn't just about creating beautiful buildings, he wanted to change lives. His role in crafting New York's 1901 tenement house law was a pivotal moment, demonstrating his commitment to improving living conditions for the city's poorest residents. This law aimed to regulate the dangerous and often overcrowded tenement buildings that plagued the Lower East Side, and it became a model for housing reform across the country. Stokes' architectural legacy also included iconic structures like St. Paul's Chapel at Columbia University and the American Geographical Society building. His designs were a marriage of function and beauty, but his influence stretched beyond bricks and mortar. As a member of the New York Municipal Arts Commission for nearly 3 decades, he helped shape the aesthetic landscape of the city, ensuring public spaces were as thoughtfully designed as private estates. But perhaps his most monumental work wasn't a building at all. For 20 years, Stokes worked obsessively on the Iconography of Manhattan Island, a 6-volume magnum opus chronicling the early history of New York City. This compilation became an essential resource for scholars, historians, and even myself as I make these videos. Stokes' meticulous research and obsessive collecting, sometimes at great personal expense, ensured that future generations could access the rich history of Manhattan's development. But perhaps that is getting a bit ahead in this story. Let's rewind a few decades and go back to the late 1800s. New inventions were revolutionizing the way people lived, and his birthplace had become all but obsolete. While many wealthy New Yorkers tore their homes down and started over, or moved northward to be around the newly fashionable Central Park, that wasn't the case for the Stokes. The exterior of his childhood home would remain exactly as it had always been, but the interior would be completely refreshed. While I wish there were before photos of the interior to show you, the afters are all that are known to exist. We'll start our tour with a white and gold drawing room, finished out with gilded wainscoting and gilded plaster panels set against silk wallpaper, with each panel containing murals. The room was filled with fine furnishings, almost completely blocking the intricate parquet floors from view. Nestled in another corner of the house was the dining room, with electric lights worked into the coffered ceiling and stained glass windows worked into the built-in hutch. The other 2 walls were covered over in antique European tapestries, with Stokes designing each doorway to perfectly accommodate smaller tapestries where transoms might otherwise be. Next we'll head into the Moorish smoking room, perfectly round in plan, with a domed ceiling soaring overhead. We can imagine men retreating here after dinner, smoke wafting through the air and breaking on the fretwork's delicate openings. Next we'll head into the library, clad in rich oak wainscoting and finished out further with leather wall treatments. At the very end of the library is an ingle nook, where we can imagine the stained glass windows flickering as they reflect a roaring fire. Turning around, we get a great view of this room and how it all comes together, but there is more to see beyond the limestone passageways. Here we find the study, decorated with centuries-old armor and other European antiques. This room served as a private retreat where Stokes could work and read completely undisturbed. While there might be a lot of artifacts that we could zoom in on, let's not linger and head through the grill. This leads to one of the smaller bedrooms in the house, also decorated with antique European pieces as well as replicas. The other bedrooms in the house are much larger and finished out in styles more cohesive with the rest of the home. Unfortunately, this chapter of the house's history would be cut short. In the early 1900s, J.P. Morgan purchased the mansion for his son, who immediately set out to renovate the mansion, essentially gutting the interior. A few decades later, it passed to a church, which made very few changes to the structure. In 1965, demolition permits were filed by the church, but protests dragged the permit process out for so long that by the time they got the green light to demolish the mansion, the church no longer had the funding to replace it with a new building. Over 20 years later, they offloaded the mansion to the ever-expanding Morgan Library, which had been set up by J.P. Morgan after demolishing a couple of the other houses on the block to make space for it. Thankfully, the house was spared the wrecking ball and was incorporated into the campus. Many of its interior features from Morgan's renovation continue to delight guests, though they aren't quite the same as what we saw from Stokes' renovation. What did you think about the mansion? And for those of you who have visited the Morgan Library, how do you think the interiors compare to what came before it? Let me know down below in the comments section. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed with that bell notification turned on so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.